I traced the sharp, white edge of the overturned photograph with a trembling index finger. Lying face down on my father's massive mahogany desk, two seemingly harmless glossy squares held the crushing weight of a death sentence. Beside me, my half-sister Lara was holding her breath, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms so fiercely I could see her skin turning bloodless. We weren't choosing wedding dresses or honeymoon destinations in the suffocating, cigar smoke-filled study. We were blindly choosing our owners. My father, swirling a heavy crystal glass of amber bourbon, watched us with the cold, calculating detachment of a merchant auctioning off his cattle. One of these photos belonged to Dante, the ruthless, terrifying head of the city's most powerful mafia syndicate, a man whose very name was a whispered threat in the underworld. The other belonged to Ashton, a billionaire heir who had supposedly survived a brutal accident only to be left in a permanent vegetative state. A living ghost confined to a bed, hooked up to machines. We were pawns in a twisted business deal to clear my father's debts. There was no escaping this room until both pictures were flipped. How did my life become a morbid lottery? It all started unraveling the day my mother's heart simply gave out. I was a teenager then, utterly shattered, standing in the torrential rain by her open grave. The soil was turning into thick mud, a perfect reflection of the mess my life was about to become. Before the dirt had even settled over her casket, my father's mistress, a woman whose existence was our family's worst-kept secret, moved into our home. With her came her daughter, Lara. Lara, my illegitimate half-sister. She was everything I wasn't. Loud, demanding, and fiercely manipulative, wielding a fake, fragile innocence like a loaded weapon. Within a week, my mother's comforting lavender scent was aired out of the hallways, replaced by the suffocating floral perfume of the woman who had broken her heart. I became a ghost in my own home, a tolerated nuisance banished to the smallest guest room while Lara paraded around in my mother's jewelry. But the day of the funeral was also the day the dark, looming shadow of Dante first fell over my life. I remember standing near the cemetery gates, my heart hollowed out by grief. Lara, playing the devastated child for the murmuring crowd, had accidentally shoved me hard from behind. I stumbled forward, my knees crashing into the sharp, wet gravel. As the stinging pain shot up my legs, the crowd gasped, but not because I had fallen. A terrifying silence descended as a towering figure stepped out of a sleek black car. It was Dante. He didn't look at the whispering crowd, nor at my father. He walked straight to me, his tailored wool coat repelling the relentless rain. He offered me a hand encased in a black leather glove. As my trembling fingers took it, he pulled me up effortlessly, his dark, impenetrable eyes locking onto mine. "She is under my protection now." His voice boomed, deep and raspy, carrying a dangerous edge that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He glanced at my father, his gaze lethal. I made a promise to her mother. For years, those words were my only real shield. While Lara and her mother stripped my life bare, hoarding my inheritance and my father's fleeting affection, the unspoken threat of Dante's protection kept them from crossing certain lines. I survived by shrinking myself, living in the quiet, dusty corners of the mansion. Yet, deep down, a dangerous seed had been planted. Over time, that terrifying, untouchable mafia boss became my secret sanctuary, a dark obsession that bloomed in the shadows of my lonely existence. I thought he was my twisted guardian angel. I had no idea that the man who had promised to protect me would eventually become the architect of my absolute ruin. Lara's hand shot forward, her manicured fingers trembling as she snatched the photograph on the left. She flipped it. The color instantly drained from her perfectly powdered face. It was Ashton, the billionaire heir. The man who, according to the whispers in high society, was nothing more than a breathing corpse strapped to a hospital bed. I reached for the remaining photo, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I turned it over, and the dark, piercing eyes of Dante stared back at me. A gasp caught in my throat. I had won the terrifying, intoxicating lottery. I was going to be his. "No!" Lara shrieked, the sound shattering the heavy silence of the study. She threw Ashton's photo onto the mahogany desk as if it had burnt her. "No, no, no, I won't do it. I am not spending the rest of my life wiping the drool off a brain-dead vegetable." She lunged toward me, her eyes wild, her fingers clawing at the lapels of my father's jacket. "Make her switch with me, Daddy. Make her, if you force me to marry that invalid, I swear to God I will slit my own wrists tonight. I'll throw myself off the balcony." My father stood frozen, his jaw clenched, unable to control the monster of a daughter he and his mistress had created. But I didn't look at them. I just stared at Danny's face on the glossy paper. To anyone else, marrying a mafia boss was a death sentence, but to me, it was supposed to be the culmination of my darkest, most desperate secret. You see, Dante and I were already intertwined in a toxic, invisible web. Long after the funeral, long after he had declared me under his protection, he remained this untouchable, cold statue. He would visit the estate on business, his presence alone making the walls vibrate, yet he rarely looked my way. But then came that one suffocatingly hot night last summer. The storm outside was violent, but it was nothing compared to the chaos when my bedroom door clicked shut. He had walked in, smelling of expensive whiskey, rain, and the unmistakable metallic tin of blood. He was drunk, his usual ironclad control shattered. That night, the untouchable mafia boss crashed to his knees, burying his face in my hands. That was the night he took my innocence. From then on, he became a phantom in my bed. He would slip into my room under the cover of darkness, devouring me with a desperate, crushing intensity. But there was a sickening catch. Every single time, before his lips even touched mine, he would pull a black silk tie from his pocket and blindfold me. I thought it was a kink. A way for a man who saw too much violence to lose himself in the dark. I was so foolishly, blindly in love with him that I let him wrap me in shadows, just happy to feel the heat of his skin against mine. But daylight is a cruel interrogator. Whenever Dante came to the house during the day, the man who had whispered raw, guttural praises into my ear the night before completely vanished. Instead, he would walk straight into the parlor and shower Lara with attention. He bought her diamond tennis bracelets, limited edition Birkin bags, and keys to sports cars. And me? If I was lucky, I received a polite nod or a generic pre-wrapped book handed to me by one of his bodyguards. I convinced myself it was an act. A brilliant, calculated ruse to keep our burning love a secret from his dangerous enemies. Until the day my fragile illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces. I had been walking past his temporary office in our West Wing when I heard his low, gravelly voice through the ajar door. He was on the phone with his underboss. I stopped, my hand resting on the wood, a smile playing on my lips until his words froze the blood in my veins. I can't bring her into this life, Dante had said, his voice laced with a raw agony I had never heard before. I love Lara too much, do you understand? She is the light. If my enemies know she is my heart, they will skin her alive. So I play the game. I keep my distance. I use the older sister Ava as a smokescreen. She's a safe shadow. Nobody cares about Ava. A safe shadow, a smokescreen. I wasn't his secret love. I was his human shield. The blindfold in the dark wasn't a game of passion. It was so he could close his own eyes and pretend I was Lara. He was using my body to quench his thirst for my sister. Standing in my father's study, the memory of that betrayal hit me with the force of a freight train. Lara was still screaming, tears of pure venomous rage straining down her face, threatening to end her life. I looked at the photo of Dante in my trembling hand. The man who had used my body, broken my heart, and secretly worshipped the sister who had stolen my mother's life. "Stop screaming," I whispered. My voice was hollow, devoid of any life. Lara froze, her chest heaving, staring at me with venomous, tear-filled eyes. I slowly slid Dante's photograph across the polished wood toward her and picked up the picture of Ashton the living ghost. "I'll switch with you," I said, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. "You can have the monster. I'll take the vegetable." Lara snatched Dante's photo with a triumphant, malicious smirk, her suicidal tears vanishing in a millisecond. My father let out a long sigh of relief. Neither of them cared that I had just signed my life over to a comatose stranger. I walked out of the study, my legs feeling like lead. I had made the ultimate sacrifice, thinking it was the end of my torment. I would marry a man who couldn't speak, couldn't move, and couldn't hurt me. It was a miserable fate, but it was safe. But as I reached my bathroom, a sudden, violent wave of nausea hit me. I collapsed in front of the porcelain toilet, dry heaving until my ribs ached. When I finally rested my forehead against the cool tiles, catching my pale, terrified reflection in the mirror, a chilling realization crawled up my spine. My period was 3 weeks late. I wasn't just engaged to a comatose man to protect my sister. I was carrying the heir of the mafia boss who loved her. The secret of my pregnancy became a ticking time bomb buried beneath my ribs. I guarded it fiercely, locking the truth away behind baggy cashmere sweaters and forced, hollow smiles. I was determined to marry Ashton. The vegetative billionaire was my only escape hatch, a silent sanctuary where I could raise my child far away from the blood-soaked, treacherous world of the Mafia. Because of the volatile nature of our family's syndicate deals, the identities of the brides were strictly sealed until the wedding day. My father arranged it so that neither Dante nor Ashton's handlers knew which sister was promised to whom. It was a blind pact, a security measure, they called it. I called it my saving grace. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done torturing me. A week before the weddings, my father forced us all to attend a neutral dinner at a high-end, glass-walled restaurant downtown to finalize the dowry transfers. Dante was there, looking like a dark, lethal god in a tailored charcoal suit. As always, his eyes constantly drifted to Lara, who preened under his gaze, dripping in the diamonds he had bought her. I sat at the far end of the table, quietly sipping my water, my hand instinctively resting over my flat stomach. I just needed to survive the night. Then the glass shattered. It happened in a fraction of a second. A deafening roar tore through the elegant dining room as a barrage of bullets ripped through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Screams erupted. Diners scrambled, knocking over tables, crystal wine glasses exploding into deadly shrapnel. Chaos swallowed the room. My first instinct was to drop, to protect the tiny life inside me. But my foot caught on the heavy tablecloth and I stumbled, exposed in the center of the crossfire. "Dante!" I screamed, a raw primal cry for the man who had sworn an oath at my mother's grave to protect me. The man whose child I was carrying. He was only 10 feet away. He turned at the sound of my voice. Time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl as our eyes locked. I saw the calculation in his dark gaze, the split-second decision. And then he turned his back on me. He lunged in the opposite direction, throwing his massive body over Lara, shielding her beneath a heavy oak table. He chose her. He chose his light over his safe shadow. Before I could even process the crushing weight of that betrayal, a white-hot agony tore through my side. The force of the bullet spun me around, and I collapsed onto the carpet, my blood rapidly pooling into the intricate woven patterns. The last thing I saw before the darkness pulled me under was Dante's hand, tightly gripping Lara's. I woke up to the sterile, blinding lights of a hospital room and the rhythmic, terrifying beep of a heart monitor. Panic seized my throat. My hands flew to my stomach. "The baby is fine," a cold, gravelly voice spoke from the corner of the room. Dante stepped out of the shadows. His white shirt was stained with my blood. His face was a mask of rigid, impenetrable stone, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt maybe? Or just annoyance. I didn't care anymore. The desperate, pathetic love I had harbored for him had died on that restaurant floor. "Get out," I rasped, my voice trembling with a venom I didn't know I possessed. "Get out of my room, Dante, now." He stiffened, his jaw clenching. "Ava, I said get out." I screamed, the effort sending a blinding spike of pain through my stitched side. Before he could respond, the door flew open and Lara burst in, looking perfectly pristine without a single hair out of place. She took one look at Dante's grim face and my furious tears, and instantly went into her theatrical act. "Ava, I was so worried," she cried, rushing to the side of my bed. But as she leaned in, her eyes hardened into a malicious glare. She leaned her weight onto my wounded side. I gasped in agony, blindly thrashing my arm out to push her away. My hand barely brushed her shoulder, but Lara threw herself backward with a dramatic shriek, crashing to the floor. She clutched her cheek, sobbing hysterically. "Dante, she hit me. I just wanted to see if she was okay, and she attacked me." Dante didn't even look at me. He rushed to Lara, scooping her up into his arms, his eyes blazing with a protective fury that was never meant for me. "You ungrateful bitch," he spat at me, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "I should have let you bleed out." He carried her out, leaving me gasping for air in the silent, suffocating hospital room. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. 2 nights later, I discharged myself, desperate to return to the estate and finalize my marriage papers to Ashton. I was walking through the dimly lit hospital parking garage, clutching my ribs when strong, rough hands grabbed me from behind. A foul-smelling rag was clamped over my mouth. I fought, kicking and scratching like a wild animal, terrified for my unborn child, but I was weak. They dragged me into the back of a blacked-out van. There were 3 of them Dante's men. I recognized the tattoos on their necks. They threw me onto the metal floor, the impact jarring my fresh wound. Then the beating began. It wasn't meant to kill me. It was meant to break me. To teach me a lesson for hurting their boss's precious Lara. Heavy boots kicked my legs, my back, my shoulders. I curled into a tight, desperate ball, wrapping my arms fiercely around my stomach, taking every brutal blow to protect my baby. Please! I sobbed, blood filling my mouth. Please stop. One of the men held up a phone on speaker. The connection crackled, and then I heard it. Dante's voice, cold, detached. Is it done? He asked. Dante. I screamed into the phone, my voice cracking with absolute terror. Dante, please. Tell them to stop. I'm pregnant. I'm carrying your baby. Please, don't kill our child. Silence hung on the line. A heavy, suffocating silence that felt like a noose tightening around my neck. I waited for the gasp, for the realization, for the desperate order to stand down. Instead, Dante let out a low, humorless scoff. You really are pathetic, Ava. His voice echoed from the phone, sharp as a scalpel. Lying about a child just to save your own skin? After what you did to your sister, you disgust me. Finish it, he ordered his men. The line went dead. A heavy boot slammed into my ribs, and my world exploded into a shower of white-hot stars. As I lay there on the cold metal floor, tasting my own blood, my vision fading into absolute black, my heart didn't break. It turned to ice. Dante had just ordered the execution of his own child. If I survived this night, I swore to God I would become a ghost. I would marry Ashton, the paralyzed billionaire, and I would make sure Dante never ever saw my face again. I woke up in a pool of freezing, muddy water in a deserted industrial lot, the metallic taste of blood thick on my tongue. Every breath was a jagged shard of glass tearing through my ribs. I don't know how long I lay there after Dante's men had dumped me, but the only thing that forced my broken body to move was the frantic, desperate need to protect the tiny flutter of life inside me. I dragged myself through the dirt, my fingernails breaking, my tears mixing with the rain. When I finally reached a discreet underground clinic hours later, the doctor's grim face told me everything I needed to know about how I looked. But then he turned on the ultrasound monitor. A faint, rapid heartbeat echoed through the sterile room. My baby had survived the monster's wrath. In that tiny, rhythmic sound, the last agonizing remnants of my love for Dante disintegrated into cold, hardened steel. I was done being a victim. I was going to marry Ashton, the paralyzed ghost, and I was going to vanish from this hell forever. The wedding day arrived wrapped in a suffocating layer of gray fog. My father had orchestrated the dual ceremonies at opposite ends of our sprawling, secluded family estate to maintain the absolute secrecy of the blind pact. I was sealed inside a windowless antechamber, my bruised, battered body hidden beneath a heavy, high-necked vintage gown of ivory lace. A thick, opaque veil concealed the split in my lip and the purple contusion blooming across my cheekbone. There was no priest in my room. There was no altar, no flowers, no music. Just my father's ruthless lawyer, a stack of ironclad contracts, and a black telephone sitting on a mahogany table. I was marrying Ashton by proxy over the phone before being shipped off to his remote, heavily guarded estate. Do you, Ava, take Ashton to be your lawfully wedded husband? The lawyer droned, his eyes glued to his gold Rolex. I stared at the telephone, the speaker crackling with dead, empty static. Somewhere on the other end of that line was a man trapped in his own body, a man who couldn't hurt me. I do, I whispered, my voice raspy from screaming in the dark just days before. I signed the paper. The heavy thud of the lawyer's stamp sealed my fate. I was no longer Dante's shadow. I was Mrs. Ashton. But I couldn't have known that a mile away in the estate's grand chapel, a catastrophic reckoning was ripping through the stained glass. Standing at the altar, cloaked in absolute power and dark arrogance, Dante waited for his mystery bride. When the doors opened and the veiled figure walked down the aisle, he was ready to claim his prize. He reached out, his large, scarred hands grasping the delicate lace of the veil, and pulled it back. It was Lara. For a fraction of a second, Dante thought he had won. He thought the universe had handed him the woman he had sacrificed everything to protect. He smiled, tracing his thumb over her soft, perfectly unblemished cheek. But as he looked into her triumphant, gloating eyes, a sudden violent dissonance struck him. He looked down at her hands as she eagerly grabbed his. They were soft, impeccably smooth. Wait, like a jagged lightning bolt, a memory from 3 years ago violently tore through Dante's mind. He was bleeding out in a rain-soaked alley, a rival syndicate's bullet lodged inches from his heart, the suffocating smell of garbage and copper. And then a girl who had thrown herself into the mud, her small, surprisingly strong hands pressing fiercely into his torn flesh to stop the bleeding. She had dragged his heavy, dying body behind a dumpster, whispering a frantic, soothing melody. He had been delirious, his vision swimming in blackness, but he remembered the distinct crescent-shaped scar on her wrist. He remembered the comforting, earthy scent of lavender and old books. When he had finally woken up in the hospital days later, Lara had been sitting by his bed, claiming she was the one who had saved him. He had believed her. He had built his entire empire of love and protection around her on that single foundational lie. Dante stared at Lara's flawless, unscarred wrists at the altar. He inhaled sharply. Lara smelled of synthetic vanilla and expensive hairspray. "The alley," Dante whispered, his voice trembling a sound no one in the underworld had ever heard from the ruthless boss. "When you pulled me behind the dumpster. What song did you sing to me?" Lara froze, her triumphant smile faltering. Dante, darling, it was so traumatic. I blocked it out." "What song?" His voice dropped to a lethal, vibrating growl. It was a pop song on the radio." She panicked, her eyes darting around the silent, horrified cathedral. The illusion shattered. The world tilted on its axis as the horrifying, mind-bending truth crashed down on Dante. It was never Lara, the soft voice in the dark. The frantic hands covered in his blood, the intoxicating scent of lavender. The woman who had given herself to him in the pitch black of night, the woman he had used, discarded, and replaced with a cheap, venomous imitation. It was Ava, it had always been Ava. And then the memory of his own cold voice on the phone echoed in his skull. Finish it. He had ordered his men to beat the woman who had saved his life. The woman who had screamed that she was carrying his child. "No," Dante gasped, stumbling backward as if he had been shot in the chest all over again. The color drained from his face, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He dropped Lara's hand as if she were a venomous snake. "Dante, where are you going?" Lara shrieked as he turned and sprinted down the aisle, shoving terrified guests out of his way. He burst out of the heavy cathedral doors into the blinding daylight, his chest heaving, his heart hammering against his ribs in a panicked frenzy. "Ava?" His roar tore through the manicured gardens, raw and desperate. I was just stepping into the back of a black armored town car when I heard it. I paused, my hand on the doorframe, and slowly turned my veiled head. Dante was running across the vast lawn, his tailored suit jacket abandoned, his tie loose, looking like a madman. He was sprinting toward me with a desperation that bordered on insanity, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. He knew. I could see it in the way he was tearing across the grass. He finally knew the truth. "Ava, stop. Please, God, Ava, stop." He screamed, his legs giving out as he crashed to his knees on the gravel, just 10 yards away. He reached out a trembling hand toward me, tears, actual tears, streaming down the face of the most feared man in the city. "It was you. It was always you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "The baby." I stood perfectly still, the wind catching the heavy lace of my veil. I looked down at the broken, sobbing Mafia boss bleeding on the gravel for me. I felt absolutely nothing. Without a word, I climbed into the car and pulled the heavy door shut with a definitive, echoing slam. The engine roared to life, kicking up a cloud of white dust that washed over Dante's kneeling figure, leaving him choking on the ruins of the love he had systematically destroyed. The car sped away toward Ashton's estate, carrying me toward a husband I had never seen, and a destiny I couldn't possibly predict. The iron gates of Ashton's sprawling, cliffside estate closed behind my car with a heavy, final clang. I had braced myself for a mausoleum. I expected sterile white walls, the incessant beeping of life support machines, and the suffocating smell of antiseptic. I was prepared to spend the rest of my life reading books to a man who couldn't hear me, trading my freedom for the safety of my unborn child. But the reality of my new prison was entirely different. The staff treated me not like a burden, but like a queen. I was given a master suite that overlooked the crashing ocean, filled with warm sunlight and the gentle sound of the waves. And then the gifts began to arrive. On my first morning, I woke up to a massive crystal vase of fresh lavender my mother sent, the very scent Dante had completely forgotten sitting on my nightstand. The next day, a first edition copy of a rare poetry book I had once admired in a shop window was left on my reading chair. Then a delicate, incredibly soft cashmere shawl to wrap around my healing ribs. Every time I asked the head housekeeper who was sending these thoughtful, deeply personal items, she would just offer a warm, polite smile and say, "From your husband, ma'am, Mr. Ashton." I was utterly bewildered. How could a man trapped in a vegetative state coordinate such perfectly tailored gifts? I convinced myself it was the work of an overzealous estate manager trying to make the tragic bride feel welcome. I spent my days walking the quiet gardens, my hand resting gently on my swelling stomach, feeling the tiny flutters of my resilient baby. For the first time in my life, I felt a fragile, tentative peace. Until exactly 1 week after our wedding day. It was past midnight. A heavy thunderstorm was raging outside, throwing jagged flashes of lightning across my bedroom walls. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, the phantom ache of my bruised ribs keeping me awake. Suddenly, I heard the faint, distinct click of my bedroom door unlocking. My blood ran cold. The Mafia had found me. Dante had come to finish what his men started. I scrambled backward against the headboard, my hands instinctively shielding my stomach as the heavy mahogany door swung open. A tall, broad-shouldered silhouette stepped into the room. He didn't turn on the lights. He simply closed the door behind him and locked it. "Don't come any closer," I breathed, my voice trembling in the dark. A flash of lightning illuminated the room for a split second and the scream died in my throat. The man standing at the foot of my bed wasn't wearing a hitman's leather jacket, nor was he Dante. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, standing tall, imposing, and undeniably powerful. "I apologize if I frightened you, Ava." A deep, velvet voice resonated through the room. It was smooth, rich, and entirely lucid. I had to arrive under the cover of the storm. There are eyes everywhere. He reached out and switched on the small bedside lamp. I stopped breathing. The man bathed in the warm, golden light was devastatingly handsome. He had sharp, aristocratic features, piercing steel-gray eyes, and a jawline that looked carved from marble, and he was standing firmly on his own 2 feet. "Ashton?" I whispered, my mind completely short-circuiting. But the accident, the coma, the rumors. He offered a soft, almost apologetic smile and stepped closer, moving with the lethal grace of a predator. When you are the sole heir to an empire built among wolves, a moment of weakness is a death sentence. The accident was an assassination attempt. To survive, to root out the traitors in my own house, I had to become a ghost. Let them think I was a vegetable while I pulled the strings from the shadows. He sat gently on the edge of my bed. For the first time, a man was looking at me, really looking at me, not as a shadow, not as a stand-in for my sister, but as me. "I investigated the woman I was blindly tied to," Ashton said softly, his gaze dropping to the fading yellow bruise on my cheekbone, his eyes darkening with a dangerous, protective fury. "I know what Dante did to you. I know about the baby. And I swear to you on my life, Ava, no one will ever lay a hand on either of you again." He reached out, his warm, strong fingers gently grazing my uninjured cheek. I flinched purely out of habit, expecting a blow or a blindfold, but his touch was incredibly tender. That night, my supposedly comatose husband didn't just stay in my room. He stayed in my life. As the weeks turned into months, the cold, empty spaces in my heart were flooded with a love I never knew existed. Ashton was everything Dante wasn't. When we made love, he never hid my face in the dark. He kept the lamps burning bright, his intense, adoring eyes locked onto mine, worshipping every inch of my body, tracing the curve of my growing belly with absolute reverence. He was attentive, overwhelmingly passionate, and entirely devoted to me. He wasn't my protector out of a twisted sense of obligation. He was my partner. He healed the broken, bleeding girl Dante had left behind and forged her into a queen. Meanwhile, Dante's empire was crumbling. The realization of what he had done, that he had ordered the beating of the woman who saved his life, the woman who loved him, the mother of his child, drove him to the brink of insanity. He exiled Lara, throwing her back into the gutter she came from, stripping her of every diamond and car. He became a frantic, desperate shell of a man, tearing the city apart, trying to find a way to breach Ashton's impenetrable fortress. 6 months into my pregnancy, he finally managed it. Ashton and I were walking through the estate's private botanical gardens when a massive breach occurred at the outer gates. Dante had driven his own armored SUV straight through the security barricades, taking a graze from a guard's bullet to the shoulder just to get inside. Ashton immediately stepped in front of me, his hand slipping into his coat for his weapon, his jaw set in lethal determination. Dante stumbled out of his ruined car, bleeding, looking like a feral, starving animal. His dark eyes locked onto me and then slowly drifted down to my very obvious, rounded belly. The breath left his lungs in a ragged, agonizing gasp. He dropped to his knees right there in the dirt, surrounded by Ashton's armed guards. "Ava?" Dante choked out, his voice cracking, tears carving paths through the dirt on his face. He held his hands out to me, shaking violently. "Please, I know the truth. I know you saved me in that alley. I know I was a monster. I was blind. I love you. It was always you. Please come back to me. Let me be a father to our child. Let me fix this." The great, terrifying Mafia boss was reduced to a weeping, pathetic mess at my feet, begging for the very thing he had ordered his men to destroy. A year ago, this sight would have broken my heart. I would have run to him, blindfolded myself, and accepted his broken pieces. But I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I stepped out from behind Ashton, my hand resting protectively over my baby. I looked down at Dante, searching my soul for even a spark of the blazing fire I used to feel for him. There was nothing, just cold dead ash. "You didn't just break my heart, Dante," I said, my voice steady, carrying over the wind. "You tried to bury me, but you forgot that I'm a seed. You don't get to harvest the garden after you set it on fire." I turned away from him, slipping my hand into Ashton's. My husband's grip was firm, warm, and unshakable. "Take out the trash," Ashton ordered his guards, not even sparing Dante a second glance. As we walked back toward our beautiful sunlit mansion, Dante's agonized. Gut-wrenching screams echoed behind us, begging for a second chance he would never get. I didn't look back. I leaned my head against Ashton's shoulder, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. I had pulled the winning card after all. I had chosen the man who the world thought was dead, only to find the one man who finally taught me how to live.